I still remember the exact moment they started laughing. Not loudly. Not all at once. Just enough for me to hear it. A whisper first, then a glance. Then that look people give when they've already decided you don't belong. It was the kind of silence that cuts deeper than noise. And I was standing right in the center of it. The Grand Meridian Gala wasn't the kind of place people like me were invited to. It was the kind of place where women arrived in custom gowns from Gucci, where heels clicked like quiet declarations of power, and where every conversation sounded like a negotiation disguised as a compliment. You didn't just show up there. You were expected, and I wasn't. I knew that the moment I stepped out of the car, black SUVs lined the entrance. Valets moved like clockwork. Cameras flashed every few seconds. And then there was me. No designer logo anyone could recognize. No stylist. No PR team. Just a dress. My dress. I adjusted the sleeves slightly as I walked up the steps, ignoring the way one of the assistants hesitated before checking my name. He scanned the list once, then twice, then looked at me again, like he was trying to solve a mistake. "Are you sure you're on the guest list?" I smiled. "Try the second page." He did, and his expression changed immediately. Subtle, professional, but different. "Yes. Of course. Welcome." Of course. That was the first shift. Small, but important. Because it meant I was exactly where I was supposed to be, even if no one else knew why. Inside, the room felt like another world. Crystal chandeliers, soft orchestral music, champagne glasses that never stayed empty for more than a few seconds. And people. So many people who had spent their entire lives making sure they would never have to question whether they belonged in a room like this. I walked past a group near the entrance. One of them glanced at me, then leaned slightly toward her friend. "I don't recognize that designer," she said. Her friend followed her gaze. There was a pause, then a small smile. "That's because there isn't one." They both laughed, quietly, politely. The kind of laugh that pretends to be kind, but isn't. I kept walking. Because this wasn't new. People like them don't laugh at you because of what you're wearing. They laugh because they think they understand what it means. And they were wrong. Across the room, I spotted Elena. Of course, she was there. She always was. Tall. Perfect posture. Wrapped in something that looked like it had just walked off a Valentino runway. She saw me almost instantly, and for a moment, her expression froze. Just a fraction of a second, but I caught it. Surprise. Then amusement. Then something sharper. She walked toward me, champagne glass in hand. "I wasn't expecting to see you here," she said. "I got an invitation." Her eyes dropped briefly to my dress, not even trying to hide it. That's bold. There it was. The word people use when they don't want to say what they actually mean. Strange. Unacceptable. Embarrassing. I tilted my head slightly. "You don't like it?" She smiled. "Oh, I love confidence." Another pause. "It's just, this event usually has a certain standard." And there it was. The line, drawn perfectly, carefully. In front of everyone who was close enough to hear, I nodded slowly. Good thing I didn't come here to meet their standards. That got a reaction. Not from her. From the people around us. Because confidence is only acceptable when it's expected. When it comes from someone they already respect. Not from someone they've already decided doesn't belong. Elena let out a soft laugh. "Well, enjoy the evening." Translation. Stay in your lane. Don't embarrass yourself, and definitely don't make us uncomfortable. She turned away before I could respond, because in her mind, the conversation was already over. But she didn't know something. None of them did. Not yet. I moved deeper into the room. More glances. More whispers. More people trying to figure out why I was there. And more importantly, why I wasn't trying to hide. Because that's what they expected. If you don't belong, you shrink, You stay quiet. You disappear into the background. But I didn't. I walked like I owned every step. Because I did. Even if they couldn't see it yet. Near the center of the hall, a small crowd had formed around one of the designers being featured that night. A capsule collection. Limited release. The kind of thing people pretend to admire before checking if it's already sold out. I watched as someone ran their hand over a dress. "It's beautiful," she said, "but I don't know if it's different enough." Different enough. I almost smiled, because that was the entire point. They wanted something new, but only if it still felt familiar, recognizable, approved. And that's why they hadn't understood my dress the moment they saw it, because it wasn't trying to be approved. A server passed by with a tray of champagne. I took one, not because I needed it, but because it gave me a reason to pause, to observe, to wait, because timing matters. More than people realize. Across the room, I saw him, Daniel, standing near the stage, talking to two investors. Tailored suit, confident posture, the kind of presence that made people assume he was important before they even knew why. He looked up, and for a moment, our eyes met. There it was again, that same flicker I had seen on Elena's face. Recognition, followed by something else. Concern. He excused himself from the conversation and walked toward me, faster than he probably intended. "You came," he said quietly. "I was invited." "That's not what I meant." Of course it wasn't. His eyes moved briefly over my dress. Not like the others. Not mocking. Not confused. Just calculating. "You shouldn't be here like this," he said. I took a sip of champagne. "Like what?" He lowered his voice. "They're already talking." I glanced around the room. "I know." "Then why would you?" "Because I wanted them to play." That stopped him. Completely. Because now the situation didn't make sense anymore. And when something doesn't make sense, people start paying attention. Really paying attention. I set the glass down on a nearby table. "Relax," I said. "I'm not here to impress anyone." "Then why are you here?" I looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time that night, I smiled. "Because by the end of tonight," I said softly, "they're all going to wish they understood what they were laughing at." And somewhere behind us, I heard it again, that same quiet laughter. But this time, it didn't sound the same, because now it had a timer on it. The laughter didn't stop. It just changed shape. Quieter, sharper, more intentional, because now it wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was attention, and attention, in a room like this, is never neutral. I could feel it following me as I moved through the gala, eyes lingering just a second too long. Conversations pausing as I passed. Smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. They weren't ignoring me anymore. They were watching, and that was exactly where I needed them. A woman in a structured white blazer, clearly someone important. Probably editorial, stepped slightly into my path. "Excuse me," she said. Polite but direct. "Who are you wearing?" There it was. The question, not who are you, but who made you acceptable. I met her gaze. Myself. She blinked. Just once, then smiled. The kind of smile people use when they think you're joking. "Oh, that's creative." Creative. Another safe word. Another way to dismiss something without understanding it. She gave me a small nod and turned away, already losing interest, because in her world, if something didn't come with a label, it didn't exist. That made this easier. Across the room, I saw Elena again. This time, she wasn't alone. 2 women stood beside her, both in dresses that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. One of them glanced at me, whispered something. Elena didn't even try to hide her reaction this time. She laughed, openly, and then she raised her glass slightly in my direction. "Not a toast," A signal, an invitation, or maybe a trap. I walked over. Of course I did. Because when someone thinks they're about to control the narrative, that's the perfect moment to let them try. Elena, I said. Calm. You looked exactly like I expected. One of the women beside her let out a small, surprised breath. Elena's smile tightened, still sharp. She said, I see nothing's changed. Everything's changed. Another pause. This one heavier. More people were listening now. Not obviously, but enough. Elena tilted her head. So tell me, she said. Her voice just loud enough to carry. What exactly is that supposed to be? There it was. Not a compliment. Not even disguised. A direct challenge. I glanced down at my dress for a moment, let the silence stretch, then looked back up. It's what happens, I said, when you stop asking for permission. A few people nearby shifted slightly, because that wasn't the answer they expected. Elena let out a soft laugh. No, I mean the design, she said. The cut is unusual. And the fabric. She reached out, lightly, 2 fingers brushing the sleeve. Just enough to make it look casual. Just enough to make it feel invasive. I don't recognize it, she finished. Of course she didn't. She wasn't supposed to. Not everything is made to be recognized immediately. I said. She smiled. But everything here is friend. That line landed. Because it was true. This room didn't reward originality. It rewarded familiarity, reputation, approval, and I had brought none of those. At least, not in a way they could see. One of the women beside her stepped forward slightly. I think it's interesting, she said, carefully, but I'm not sure it fits the theme. Theme. Another rule. Another invisible boundary designed to keep everything predictable. I nodded. You're right, I said. It doesn't. That caught them off guard, because I wasn't defending myself. I wasn't trying to belong. I was agreeing, and that made it harder to dismiss me. Elena crossed her arms slightly. So why wear it here? She asked. Now the room was quiet, not silent, but focused, because even the people pretending not to listen were listening. I met her Gazi, because this is the only place it could work. A beat. Then, a voice behind us. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention. The host, standing near the stage. Perfect timing. I didn't turn immediately. Neither did Elena. But the room shifted. People moving, repositioning, gravitating toward the center. Because something official was about to happen. Something important. Elena gave me one last look. A small smile. Confident. Certain. Like she had already decided how this night would end. Well, she said softly. Let's see how long that confidence lasts. She stepped away, her group following, leaving me standing there, exactly where I needed to be, near the stage, close enough, visible enough. The host adjusted his microphone. Tonight, he began. We're not just celebrating design. A pause. We're introducing something new. That got everyone's attention, because new in a room like this meant opportunity, investment, status. Our featured collaboration this evening, he continued, has already generated significant interest. I felt it before I saw it. That shift in energy, subtle, but real, because now people weren't just looking for approval. They were looking for advantage. And in just a few moments, he said, we'll be revealing the designer behind it. Designer. The word echoed through the room, and suddenly everything changed. People straightened, eyes sharpened. Conversation stopped completely, because now this wasn't just a party. It was a reveal, and everyone wanted to be on the right side of it. I glanced toward Daniel. He was watching me, not the stage. Me. His expression tighter now, more serious, because he understood something the others didn't. Not fully, But enough, the host continued. This piece, he said, was described by our partners as unexpected, disruptive, and impossible to ignore. A few quiet murmurs, interest rising, because those weren't safe words. Those were risky words, and risk is where power shifts happen. I looked down at my dress again, ran my fingers lightly along the fabric, felt the texture, the structure, the intention behind every line. And for the first time that night, I let myself breathe, because the moment was close now, very close. Behind me, I heard it again, a whisper. She really shouldn't have worn that. Another voice. It's embarrassing. I smiled, just slightly, because in less than a few minutes, that same sentence was going to sound very different. On stage. The host lifted a small card. Before we begin, he said, I'd like to thank our brand partners for making this possible. Names followed, one after another. Luxury houses, investors, collaborators, the kind of names that made people listen carefully, the kind of names that made people adjust their posture just a little, because proximity to power is everything. And finally, he said, the designer. The room went still, completely still, and the piece that represents this collaboration, a pause, long enough to matter, is already here tonight. That did it. Heads turned, people scanning the room, looking, searching, trying to figure out who had the power, who had the approval, who had already won, before the rest of them even realized the game had started. I didn't move, didn't react, didn't give them anything, because anticipation is more powerful than revelation. The host smiled slightly. And I believe, he said, some of you have already seen it. A ripple moved through the crowd. Confusion, curiosity. A few people laughed softly because they thought it was a joke, a tease, something clever. Elena turned slightly, her eyes scanning the room, until they landed on me. And for the first time that night, her smile faded. Just a little. Not gone, but uncertain. Daniel didn't look surprised. He just closed his eyes for a brief second, like he had been hoping this moment wouldn't come. Not like this. Not here. Not in front of everyone. The host lifted his hand slightly. Could our designer, he said, please step forward? And that was the moment everything changed. Because suddenly, every whisper, every laugh, every glance was about to become something else. I set my shoulders, took one step forward, and let the silence do the rest. The silence didn't break. It deepened. Because when I took that step forward, no one clapped. No one reacted. They just watched, confused, trying to process what they were seeing, because their brains were doing something very simple. Rejecting it. Rejecting me. Rejecting the possibility that the answer standing right in front of them was the answer. The host looked at me, then at the card in his hand, then back at me again, and for a fraction of a second, even he hesitated. Not because he didn't know, but because he understood exactly what this would do to the room. Ladies and gentlemen, he said slowly, carefully, the designer behind tonight's featured collaboration, a pause, then, is already wearing the piece. That was the first crack. Not loud, not explosive, but visible, like glass beginning to fracture under pressure. People turned, heads shifting, eyes locking onto me, all at once. And then, nothing. No applause, no recognition, just disbelief, because it didn't match what they expected. And when reality doesn't match expectation, people freeze. Elena didn't move, but her eyes did, sharp now, focused, searching my face like she was trying to find the mistake. Because in her world, there had to be one. The host stepped slightly closer to the edge of the stage. And yes, he added, voice steady now, the piece you've been discussing, the one described as disruptive, unexpected, and impossible to ignore. He looked directly at me. Is the one she designed. The room reacted this time, not with applause, with sound, whispers breaking into each other, questions overlapping, confusion turning into urgency. Wait, what? That dress? No. That can't be. I thought it was. But no one finished their sentences, because no one wanted to be the first to admit they had just misjudged the most important person in the room. I walked forward, slowly, deliberately, each step measured, because now every movement mattered. The closer I got to the stage, the quieter it became again, not because they understood, but because they were starting to. There's a difference, and that difference is where power shifts. I stepped onto the platform, turned, faced them, all of them, the same people who had looked at me like I didn't belong, the same people who had laughed, not even 10 minutes ago. I let the silence stretch, because silence, in a moment like this, forces people to think, and thinking leads to realization, and realization is where the humiliation begins. The host handed me the microphone. I didn't take it immediately. I looked out at the room first, made eye contact. One person, then another, until people started looking away. Because now they understood something very simple. They had been wrong. And not privately, publicly. I didn't design this dress to be recognized. I said finally, my voice calm, clear, unshaken. I designed it to be remembered. A shift, subtle, but real, because now they weren't just reacting, they were listening. I turned slightly, letting the light catch the structure of the dress, the lines, the movement, the details they had ignored, because they didn't come with a label. You said it didn't fit the theme. I continued. A few people glanced at Elena. She didn't react, not visibly, but her posture had changed, just enough. You were right, I said. It doesn't. Another pause. Then, it sets the next one. That landed, because now this wasn't about defending myself anymore. It was about redefining the room. I lowered the microphone slightly. Let the words settle, because timing is everything. Behind me, the host spoke again, and if I may add, he said, stepping forward, this design is not just a standalone piece. That got their attention instantly, because now we were moving into something else, something bigger, a limited collection. He continued, already secured by several of our partners. Murmurs again, different this time, sharper, more focused, because now there was scarcity, and scarcity creates desire. Distribution discussions, he added, have already begun with houses including Louis Vuitton and Net-a-Porter. That was the second crack, and this one was louder, because now it wasn't just about taste. It was about validation, external, recognized, untouchable. I watched it happen in real time. The shift, the recalculation, the exact moment people started rewriting their opinions to match the new reality. That's impossible. Someone whispered, but it wasn't. And that was the problem. Elena's glass lowered slowly. Her eyes never left me, because now she wasn't trying to dismiss me anymore. She was trying to understand how she had missed it. Daniel stepped slightly closer to the stage, not smiling, not celebrating, just watching, because he knew something else, something they didn't. Not yet. The host gestured lightly toward me. The designer, he said, will be taking questions shortly. Questions, of course, because now everyone wanted something. Attention, access, association. I stepped forward again, just one step, but it was enough, because now I wasn't standing on the edge of the stage anymore. I was at the center, exactly where they had never imagined I would be. I scanned the room once more, and this time, no one laughed, no one whispered, no one looked away, because now They were all waiting, waiting to see what I would say next, waiting to see how far this would go, waiting to see if they had just witnessed a moment or the beginning of something much bigger. I raised the microphone again, and this time I didn't smile. Funny thing about recognition, I said, a pause. You don't need it. Another pause. Until everyone else does. Silence. Complete, because now they understood not just who I was, but what this meant, and, more importantly, what it was about to cost them. This story contains fictionalized elements for entertainment and educational purposes. The silence didn't last long. It never does when money enters the room. The first hand went up before the host even finished introducing the Q&A. A man in a charcoal suit. Mid-50s. The kind of presence built on decades of being listened to. Stepped forward slightly. "Can you walk us through the material?" he asked. "It looks unconventional." That word again. Unconventional. But this time, it wasn't dismissive. It was careful, respectful, even. Because now he wasn't judging. He was evaluating. I nodded once. "The base structure uses a composite weave," I said. "Layered tension points. Adaptive drape. It responds differently depending on movement." He leaned in slightly. Interested. Actually interested. Meaning, it doesn't perform the same way twice. I said, "Which makes it difficult to replicate." A pause. Then, "Which makes it valuable." That landed exactly the way I wanted, because now the conversation had shifted completely, from taste to control. Another voice cut in, this one faster, more urgent. "Is it patented?" There it was. The real question. Not is it beautiful. Not is it wearable. But can anyone else take it? I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence stretch just enough. Then, yes. Short, clean, final. A ripple moved through the room, because now they understood something critical. This wasn't just a dress. It was a position. And positions can be owned. I stepped slightly to the side, giving them a clearer view, letting the light hit the structure again, letting them see what they had ignored, and now desperately wanted to understand. From the edge of the crowd, a woman raised her voice. "You mentioned distribution," she said. "Is that confirmed?" I glanced briefly at the host, then back at her. "It is." "How soon?" "Soon enough that hesitation will be expensive." That line spread through the room like heat, because now time had entered the equation, and time pressure changes everything. People started shifting. Phones came out, messages being typed, names being searched, because suddenly everyone needed to know who I was. Not later. Now. Near the front. Elena finally moved. Not toward me. Toward the center. Positioning herself where she could be seen. Where she could still matter. "Congratulations," she said. Her voice smooth again. Controlled. Reconstructed. "I think we all underestimated the concept." The concept, not me. I almost smiled, because even now, she was trying to reframe it, trying to step around the fact that she had been wrong. Publicly, I met her gaze. "You didn't underestimate the concept," I said calmly. "You ignored it." A few people nearby shifted. That was sharper than they expected. But I wasn't done. "You just didn't recognize it without a name attached." That hit. Harder. Because now it wasn't just about her. It was about everyone in that room. Elena held her expression. Perfect. But her fingers tightened slightly around the glass. Almost invisible. "Unless you knew what to look for." "And now?" she asked. A challenge. Carefully wrapped. I tilted my head. "Now you do." Another silence. Short. Heavy. Because now there was nowhere to hide. Behind us. One of the assistants moved quickly toward the host, whispering something urgent. The host's expression shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. He leaned toward me slightly. "Would you mind stepping this way for a moment?" he asked quietly. I nodded. Of course, because I already knew what this was. We stepped a few feet off center. Still visible, but just outside the main focus. "What's happening?" I asked. He lowered his voice. "We're getting inquiries," he said. "A lot of them. Some immediate commitments." Of course they were. That was faster than expected. He added. "No," I said. "It wasn't." He studied me for a second, then nodded slowly, like he was starting to understand something deeper. Across the room, the energy had completely transformed. People who had laughed earlier were now moving closer. Not too close. Not yet, but enough to be seen, enough to be associated. A woman approached carefully. Different from before. More measured. "I'd love to discuss potential collaboration," she said, her tone precise, respectful, no trace of earlier dismissal. I recognized her. Not personally, but professionally. She represented a retail group that had turned down 3 independent designers in the past year for being too risky. "I'm selective," I said. She nodded immediately. Of course. No argument. No hesitation. Because now, she wasn't in a position to negotiate. Not really. Behind her. 2 more people waited. Then 3. Then 5. A small line forming, without anyone announcing it. Because this is how power actually looks. Not loud. Not forced. Just inevitable. Daniel stepped closer again. This time, he didn't stop at the edge. He came up beside me. "You planned this," he said quietly. Not a question. A realization. I glanced at him. Not exactly. He frowned slightly. "Then what?" "I planned for them to show me who they were," I said. His expression tightened. Because he knew what that meant. They didn't disappoint. Across the room, Elena was no longer speaking. She was watching. Silent. Still. Trying to find a way back into a situation that had already moved past her. And that was the real shift. Not the applause. Not the attention. But the fact that someone like her had lost control of the narrative, without even realizing when it happened. I turned back to the growing crowd in front of me. Faces I had seen earlier, now wearing entirely different expressions. Interest. Respect. Even admiration. But none of it mattered. Not really. Because it wasn't real. Not the way they thought it was. I let my gaze move over them. Slowly. Deliberately. Then said, "I'll be taking meetings tomorrow." A pause. "Not tonight." That stopped them. Completely. Because now, access had a boundary. And boundaries create demand. A man near the front spoke quickly. "I can adjust my schedule." "I'm sure you can," I said, "but so can everyone else." Another pause. Then, "I'm interested in who waits." That line settled over the room like weight. Because now, this wasn't just about opportunity. It was about selection. And selection is power. I stepped back slightly, returning the microphone to the host. "Enjoy the rest of the evening," I said. Final. And then I walked off the stage. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just done. Behind me, the room didn't return to normal. Because it couldn't. Not anymore. Too much had shifted. Too much had been revealed. And as I moved through the crowd, the same people who had laughed earlier stepped aside. Without thinking. Without being asked. Making space. Because now, they understood exactly who I was. Even if they still didn't fully understand what I had just started. By the time I stepped out of the main hall, the story had already started spreading. Not officially. Not publicly. But fast. The kind of fast that only exists in rooms like that. Messages sent before conversations ended. Names passed along before introductions were made. Quiet calls placed in corners where no one pretends to be discreet anymore. I didn't check my phone. I didn't need to. I could feel it. The shift had gone beyond the room. And that's when things become dangerous. Because attention attracts two things: opportunity and resistance. I reached the corridor just outside the main ballroom when Daniel caught up to me. "This isn't over," he said. I didn't slow down. "I know." He walked beside me. "They're not just interested," he continued. "Some of them are already trying to figure out how to position themselves around you." "Of course they are. That's not the problem." I stopped then, turned to him. "Then what is?" He hesitated, just long enough to confirm it mattered. "They're also trying to figure out how to control it." There it was. The second phase. Always predictable. First, they ignore you. Then they want you. And when they realize they can't have you, they try to contain you. I nodded once. "Let them try." Daniel studied my face. "You're too calm about this." "No," I said. "I'm exactly calm enough. Because panic is what they expect. Reaction is what they prepare for. And I had no intention of giving them either." A voice echoed from behind us. "Well, that was impressive." "Elena." "Of course." She walked toward us slowly, heels precise against the marble floor. Expression. Perfectly composed again. Too composed, which meant she was working. I didn't expect that. She added. I turned slightly. "You've said that twice tonight." She smiled, and I don't like repeating myself. "No," I said. "You don't like being wrong." A flicker. Small. But there. She ignored it. Or tried to. "You made a statement," she said. "I'll give you that." Another pause. Then, but statements don't always last. There it was. The first move. Not loud, not aggressive. Just a suggestion that what happened in that room could be undone. I met her gaze. "Neither do assumptions," I said. She stepped closer, close enough that the conversation didn't need to be loud anymore. "This industry," she said quietly, "doesn't reward disruption for long. I'm not here for long-term approval. That's obvious." Her eyes dropped briefly to my dress again. "But you'll need infrastructure," she continued. "Production, distribution, protection." Protection. Interesting word. "And you think I don't have it?" I asked. She didn't answer directly. Instead, "You have attention," she said. "That's not the same thing." No, it isn't. And she knew that. Because attention fades. Unless it's anchored to something deeper. Something harder to take. I stepped slightly closer, matching her distance. "Tell me something," I said. "When you saw this dress tonight, what did you actually see?" She frowned slightly, caught off guard. "A risk," she said after a moment. I nodded. "That's why you laughed." Her expression tightened. People laugh at things they don't understand. I continued. "Especially when they feel threatened by them." I wasn't threatened. "No," I said calmly. "You just didn't realize you should be." That landed, harder than anything else so far. Because now, this wasn't about the past anymore. It was about what came next. Before she could respond, a phone rang. Not mine. She glanced at the screen, and for the first time that night, she didn't hide her reaction. Just a flicker. But enough. She answered quickly. "Yes?" A pause. Then, her eyes shifted. Slightly. Toward me. "What do you mean already?" she asked. Another pause. Longer this time. "No," she said. Lower. "Now." "That's not possible." I didn't move. Didn't speak. Just watched. Because, whatever she was hearing, I already knew. She ended the call. Slowly. Carefully. Like she was trying to control something that had already slipped. "What is it?" Daniel asked. She didn't look at him. She looked at me. "They're listing it," she said. Where? He asked. She hesitated. Just for a second. Then, Net-a-Porter. Silence. Because that changed everything. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Now. That meant the window had already opened. The one she thought she could manage. Control. Shape. Daniel turned to me. You didn't say. I didn't need to. Because if you announce everything, you give people time to react. And time is leverage. Elena's voice sharpened. You moved too fast. She said, That's not how this works. I tilted my head slightly. Maybe not how it used to. Her jaw tightened. Do you even understand what you're stepping into? She pressed. This isn't just design. This is supply chains. Contracts. Influence. I know exactly what it is. And you think you can handle that alone? That question lingered, because it was the one everyone was thinking. But no one had asked directly. I held her gaze, then said, I'm not alone. Another pause. And this one was heavier, because now she had to consider something else. Not just what she saw, but what she didn't. Before she could respond, my phone buzzed. Then again. I glanced down. 3 messages. Then 5. Then 10. All from different numbers. Different contacts. Different names. But the same intent. Interest. Urgency. Demand. Daniel exhaled quietly. It's happening, he said. No. It had already happened. This was just the visible part. I looked back at Elena. You said statements don't last? I said. A small pause. Let's see. I turned. Started walking. Not away from them, but forward. Because momentum is something you don't chase. You create it. And once it starts, you either ride it or get left behind. Behind me. I heard her voice. Lower now. Controlled again. But different. This isn't over. She said. I didn't turn back. I know. I said, and I meant it. Because this was just the beginning. Not of success, but of resistance. And resistance is where real power gets tested. The next morning didn't feel like a morning. It felt like acceleration. The kind where everything is already moving before you even open your eyes. My phone had stopped buzzing sometime around 3 a.m. Not because the messages stopped, but because I turned it off. There's a point where information stops being useful and starts being noise. I turned it back on at 8:12. It took less than 3 seconds for everything to come back. Notifications stacking over each other. Emails marked urgent. Unknown numbers. Familiar names. And then, the headline. Not from a major publication. Not yet. But from a Fashion Insider account that people in the industry watched more closely than they admitted. Unknown designer disrupts Gala. Who is she? Under it, a photo. Not from the stage. From earlier. From the moment they laughed. Perfect. Because contrast is what makes stories spread. I didn't react. I just kept scrolling. Messages from buyers, editors, platforms. 2 from Net-a-Porter confirming early listing metrics. 1 from a contact inside LVMH asking for a conversation. And then, a different kind of message. Short. No signature. Where did you source the fabric? There it was. Not admiration. Not curiosity. Extraction. I locked the screen, because that question didn't deserve an answer. Not yet. A knock at the door. Daniel. He didn't wait to be invited in. You need to see this, he said. I stepped aside. He walked in. Already opening his tablet. This started about an hour ago. He continued. He turned the screen toward me. A thread. Private at first. Then spreading. Claims. Questions. Doubt. This isn't original. Looks like derivative work. I've seen similar structures before. There it was. Phase 3. Undermine. Not directly. Never directly. You don't attack the person. You attack the credibility. Because if people start questioning the origin, they stop trusting the outcome. I read a few more lines, then handed the tablet back. They're early, I said. Daniel blinked. That's your reaction? They're early, I repeated, which means they're unprepared. He studied me for a moment. You expected this. Of course I did. Because success doesn't surprise your competitors. It activates them. He exhaled. They're pushing it fast, he said. And not just online. What do you mean? He hesitated. Then, I got a call this morning. Someone's already trying to delay your distribution. That made me pause. Not because it was unexpected, but because of how fast it moved. Through who? I asked. He shook his head slightly. They didn't say. But it's coordinated. Of course it was. Nothing moves that quickly without structure behind it. I walked to the window, looked out, let the city settle into focus. Because when things escalate, clarity matters more than speed. They think this is about the dress, I said. Daniel frowned. Isn't it? I turned back to him. No. A beat. It never was. That's when he understood. Not fully, but enough. You need to tell me, he said. What exactly did you build? I held his gaze, then walked past him, picked up my phone, opened one of the messages, the one from Netta Porter, scrolled down, then turned the screen toward him. Look closer, I said. He leaned in. At first, nothing, just the dress, the same one, same lines, same structure. Then, he saw it, the overlay, subtle, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. A pattern, encoded, running through the fabric like a second language. That's not just design, he said slowly. No, I replied. It's not. Silence. Because now, everything shifted again. Not just in the room, not just in the narrative, but in the scale of what this actually was. It tracks movement, he said. More than that. It adapts? Yes. He looked back at me. You built a system. I nodded and protected it. That's when it clicked for him. The patent question, the timing, the distribution, the speed. None of it was accidental. None of it was reactive. It was layered, planned, not just for success, but for defense. A new notification appeared. Another message. Different sender. This one, recognizable. Elena. Of course. I opened it. Short. Direct. We need to talk. Now. Daniel watched my expression. Let me guess, he said. She wants to collaborate. I almost smiled. No, I said. She wants to contain it. Because now she understood something critical. This wasn't fashion. This was leverage. And leverage changes the rules. I typed a response. Simple. Controlled. Tomorrow. Not today. Sent it. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You're making her wait? I'm making her choose. A pause. Between reacting and understanding. He nodded slowly. Because he knew. That difference would define everything that came next. Another notification. This one louder. Public. A new article. Bigger platform this time. Rising design or industry copycat. I read the headline once, then closed it. Because this was the real test. Not the applause. Not the attention. But what happens when people try to take it from you? I set the phone down. They're going to push harder. Daniel said, I know. They'll dig into your past. I expect it. They'll try to discredit you. I looked at him. They already are. A beat. Then, they'll come for the technology. That was the important part. The part most people would miss. I nodded. That's when it gets interesting. Because you can attack a person, you can question a brand. But when something is built to withstand that, when it's structured, protected, layered, then every attack becomes something else. Exposure, proof, confirmation. I walked back toward the center of the room, focused, exactly where I needed to be. They think they're slowing me down, I said. Daniel watched me. And they're not? No. A small pause. They're accelerating the part they don't understand. He exhaled quietly, I picked up my phone again, scrolled to a different message. Not from a buyer, not from media, from a legal contact. One line. Everything is activated. I looked back at Daniel, the part where they realize, a pause, that this was never something they could take in the first place. By noon, it wasn't just an industry story anymore. It was everywhere. Not in headlines yet, but in conversations that mattered more than headlines. Private groups, investor threads, closed rooms where decisions were made before the public ever knew they existed. And in those rooms, my name had already replaced the question mark. Daniel didn't say much on the way to the meeting. He didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was loaded, because we both knew what this was. Not a discussion, not a negotiation, a test. The building wasn't labeled. Of course it wasn't. Glass exterior, minimal signage, the kind of place that doesn't need to announce itself because everyone who matters already knows where it is. Inside, everything was controlled. Temperature, lighting, sound, even the pacing of the people walking through the lobby felt intentional. We were expected. The assistant didn't ask for names. She just nodded and gestured toward the elevator. Top floor. Of course. When the doors opened, they were already there. Elena, 2 men I recognized from the night before, and 3 others I didn't, which meant they mattered. No introductions at first, just acknowledgement. Measured, careful, like everyone was trying to understand the exact position of everyone else in the room. Elena broke the silence. You moved quickly, she said. I took a seat. Across from her. So did you. A flicker. Then gone. She gestured slightly toward the others. We've reviewed the situation. She continued. There are concerns. Concerns. I almost smiled. About what? I asked. One of the men leaned forward. Older, controlled. The origin of your design, he said. The scalability. The claims attached to it. Claims. Interesting. I nodded slowly, and he exchanged a glance with Elena. Then, we believe it would be in everyone's interest, he said carefully, to structure this properly before it creates complications. There it was. The offer without calling it an offer. Control without saying the word. And what does properly mean? I asked. Elena answered this time. It means partnership, she said. Guidance. Protection. Protection again. Same word. Different tone. You'd gain access to infrastructure. She continued. Production at scale. Global distribution. Legal shielding. And in return, a pause. Just long enough. A percentage, she said. And strategic oversight. Oversight. Control. Ownership. Without saying ownership, I leaned back slightly. Let the silence settle, because the answer mattered less than the moment before it. The moment where they still believed this was negotiable. No, I said. Simple. Clear. Final. No explanation. No hesitation. Just, no. The room didn't react immediately, because rejection like that doesn't fit the script they prepared. One of the men frowned slightly. I don't think you understand the scale of what you're dealing with, he said. I do, Doc. You're stepping into systems that have been built over decades. I know. And you think you can navigate that alone. There it was again. The same question. Different voice. Same assumption. I looked at him, then at Elena, then back at him. I'm not trying to navigate your system, I said. A pause. I built my own. That shifted the room, not visibly, but structurally, because now they had to consider something they didn't want to. that this wasn't a gap they could fill. It was something that already existed, outside their control. Elena's tone sharpened. "Then why are we here?" she asked. I held her gaze. "Because you asked for this meeting." Another pause. Longer this time. Heavier. One of the other men spoke up. Younger. More direct. "There are already challenges forming," he said. "Questions about your patents. Your supply chain. Your claims. I'm aware. They're not small questions. They're not supposed to be." That threw him off. Because most people defend. Most people explain. I didn't. "You're not concerned?" he pressed. "No." "Why?" I reached into my bag, pulled out a thin folder, placed it on the table, didn't open it, didn't slide it forward, just placed it there. "Because everything you're describing," I tapped the edge of the folder lightly, "is already accounted for." No one moved, because now, curiosity had replaced control. Elena's eyes dropped to the folder, then back to me. "What is that?" she asked. I tilted my head slightly. "You tell me." She hesitated, just for a second, then reached for it, opened it, and that was the moment everything changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Because whatever she saw, she hadn't expected. Her expression didn't collapse. It tightened, controlled, but different. The men beside her leaned in. One of them went still, completely still. "What is this?" he asked quietly. "Activation," I said. Another pause. "Of what?" I met his gaze. "Everything you're trying to question." Silence. Real silence this time. Because now, they weren't evaluating me anymore. They were recalculating the entire situation. Elena closed the folder slowly, too slowly, buying time, trying to regain position. "This doesn't change the fact that it does," I said, not louder, not sharper, just certain. "It changes everything." She looked at me, really looked this time, not dismissing, not evaluating, understanding. "Finally, you planned this," she said, not like Daniel had, not as realization, as accusation. I didn't answer, because the answer didn't matter. The result did. One of the men leaned back, exhaled. "We need time to review this," he said. "Take all the time you need." Another pause. "But understand this," I added. And now, every eye was on me again, not because they wanted it to be, but because they couldn't avoid it. "You weren't invited into this," I said. A beat. "You asked to be included." Silence. Total. Because now, there was no version of this where they were in control anymore. No angle, no leverage, no narrative they could reshape. Just reality, and it didn't belong to them. I stood, slowly, deliberately, because movement, at this point, was a statement. "This meeting is over," I said. No one argued. No one stopped me. No one even tried, because they couldn't. Not after what they had just seen. I walked toward the door, hand on the handle, paused, just long enough. Then, without turning back, "Next time," I said. "Don't wait until you're already behind." And I left. Behind me, no voices, no reactions, no recovery. Just silence. The kind that only happens when people realize, too late, that they were never part of the game to begin with. The silence from that room didn't stay in that room. It spread, quietly, efficiently, exactly the way real power moves. By the time the elevator doors closed behind me, the outcome had already started rewriting itself. Not publicly, not yet, but in the only places that mattered. Decisions, allocations, access. Daniel didn't say anything as we walked out of the building. He just glanced at me once, not with questions anymore, with certainty. Because now, he understood the scale. They're done. he said finally. I didn't answer. Because done isn't a moment. It's a process. And that process had already begun. 3 days later, the headlines came. Not speculative. Not questioning. Definitive. The design that changed the system. Not disrupted. Not controversial. Changed. That word mattered. Because disruption can be absorbed. Change can't. Images of the dress were everywhere. But something else started happening. People weren't just sharing the design. They were trying to understand it. Zooming in, analyzing details, looking for the layer they missed the first time. And that was the point. Because the second look always goes deeper than the first. Net-a-Porter released their official statement at 9 a.m. Clean, minimal, but intentional. Selected pieces from the collection will be available in limited release. Further integrations to be announced. Integrations, not collections. Not seasonal drops. Integrations. The language had shifted, which meant the structure had too. 2 hours later, the message from LVMH arrived. Not a request, not an invitation. A proposal. Different tone, different positioning. Because now, they weren't trying to control it. They were trying to be near it. I read it once, then closed it. Not ignored, just not urgent. Because urgency belongs to the people who are behind. Elena never called again. Not directly. But her absence became visible. Gradually, then all at once, she stopped appearing in the places she used to dominate. Her name disappeared from conversations where it had once been automatic. Not erased. Replaced. There's a difference. And that difference is final. The first release sold out in 12 minutes. Not because of marketing. Not because of hype. Because people felt like they had missed something, and they didn't want to miss it again. That's how real demand works. Not created. Triggered. A week later, I was invited back to a room that looked very familiar. Same structure. Same glass. Same controlled environment. Different energy. This time, no one tried to lead the conversation. They waited, which is how you know power has shifted. Not when people listen. When they wait, what's next? One of them asked. Simple question, but loaded. Because it assumed something important. That there was more. I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence do its work. Because silence, now, did something very different than it did before. It didn't expose uncertainty. It created pressure. I'm not building a brand. I said finally. That caught them off guard. Because that's what they thought this was. What are you building then? Someone asked. I looked around the room, at the same faces, different expressions, different positions. A system. I said. A pause, where design isn't the product. Another pause. It's the entry point. No one interrupted, because now they were listening in a different way. Not to respond, to understand. And understanding means you're already behind. Later that night, I stood alone in front of the window, city lights stretching out beneath me. Same view, different perspective. My phone buzzed once. A message. Unknown number. I opened it. One line. You could have told me. No name. No signature. But I didn't need one. I typed back. You wouldn't have listened. Then placed the phone down. Because that conversation was already over. People still talk about the dress. The one they laughed at. The one they didn't understand. The one they tried to question. Right before they tried to claim it. They remember the moment it appeared. The moment it was revealed. The moment everything shifted. But they remember it wrong. Because they think that's when it started. It wasn't. It started long before that. In decisions no one saw. In systems no one understood. In layers they never thought to look for. The dress was never the point. It was just the first thing they couldn't ignore. And the funny thing is, if they had looked closer, if they had paid attention, if they had asked the right questions, at the right time, they might have seen it coming. But they didn't. Because they were too busy deciding. whether I belonged in the room. Now they don't decide that anymore.
This content is entirely fictional. Any similarity to real person or even is coincidental. This video is not news, not a documentary. It is presented for creative storytelling purpose only. AI assisted production